Hello all, and welcome to the June Patch Tuesday webcast. We'll begin in just a few short moments, but before we do, I'd like to remind all attendees that they are currently in listen-only mode, but please feel free to ask our panelists questions at any time, and we will answer them during the live Q&A session at the end. With that, I'd like to hand it over to Rob Brown.
Thank you, Heidi, and a very warm welcome to everybody to another Patch Tuesday. It's actually only been 4 weeks since the last Patch Tuesday, but we do actually have 6 weeks till the next one. So we do actually have quite a lot of time in this Patch Tuesday to help you roll out all of your priorities this month. As usual, I've invited 2 experts to assist me today. John, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Rob. John Cassell, Senior Solutions Architect with Syxsense. I'm based in sunny Southern California. I've been working in IT for many years, specializing in desktop and server operations, and at Syxsense, I concentrate on customer implementation, onboarding, and training.
Thank you, John. And Pete, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, no props, Rob. Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name's Pete, and I've worked for Syxsense as a pre-sales consultant for 6 years. Prior to my current role, I worked for an oil company where I managed a premise-based tool set that at the time was known as Landesk. We used that to manage around 4,500 devices for general asset management, software deployment, and of course, patch management. In my current role, very similar to John, actually, work in a pre-sales scenario, onboarding people, training people, demoing the products.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Pete. And once again, I'm Rob Brown. I'm head of customer success. One of the departments has been very busy over the last 10 to 15 years by deploying patches to secure our customer environments. And in that time, we've deployed over 100 million patches worldwide. Okay, so as usual, we are limiting the webinar to 50 minutes. This was by popular request. Please do send your questions in. We will answer them on a first come, first served basis. Of the questions that we get prior to the webinar, they're kind of similar each and every month. Do I need to join the webinar live? No, you don't. We do appreciate everybody that joins us live. But if you do subscribe or email us, we'll send you a recording. And we do talk about the Linux part of this webcast. It is a very important part of the security, as we know lots of customers are using both Microsoft and Linux in their environment. And we do talk about there being a webinar specific for Linux, and that is coming. So within the next couple of weeks, we might actually be launching the first of these Linux webinars. And if that is successful, and if that is something that you'd like, we can detach the Linux from this Patch Tuesday specific webinar. But do let us know if that is something you'd like to happen in the future. And of course, this is in fact our 12-month anniversary. It's been fantastic. We've had loads of feedback. We've improved massively the way the webcast flows, and we really do appreciate all of the thanks we get from everyone that we're helping each and every month. And we look forward to the next 12 months. So we have some news, and I just wanted to make a point that 21H1 has now been released. It is slightly late, in my opinion, as it's supposed to arrive by the 3rd month of the year. Actually just landed last month, or just before. But the testing of this feature update has been very successful. We've seen that over and above all other feature updates, the speed in which 21H1 can be installed is significantly faster than we've seen before. So that's really exciting to see Microsoft making some improvements to both the stability and the feature update itself. But unfortunately, as we have a new feature update, we have to say goodbye to a feature update, and that's 1809 is now end of life. That was end of life for after last month's Patch Tuesday. So if you're still using 1809, please upgrade to a new feature update, preferably one that has a life long enough for you to roll it out and then to plan the next one. And we have a macOS zero-day weaponized attack that we actually put on our news page. This particular vulnerability is 2021-30713, and it's known as the XCSSET. Not quite sure how to pronounce that malware, but this functions as a Trojan spyware. So what it actually does is it grabs your screen every minute, for example. So anything you have on your screen is recorded and it's sent across. That is what was weaponized. So if you are using macOS, please make sure you fully update your Mac device. It's very, very important that you do that. And if you do need to know if your machine may have been attacked, please go ahead to our news page. I'll show you that very shortly. There is actually a script that you can run that will help you identify if you have potentially been attacked. And then just food for thought, really, which was lots of news on the next version of Windows. Is it going to be another feature update? Is it going to be Windows 11? Really exciting to see, but since feature updates are so established in their routine, you know, in spring and in autumn, is it going to be the same strategy? Is it simply going to be another feature update? Who knows? But as soon as we do know, as soon as we find out, if we do need to, we will rewrite a new strategy to help our customers keep those operating systems up to date. And with that, I know, John, you've been doing some research into the third parties that customers should be prioritizing. Would you like to walk us through what you've been researching?
Yeah, thank you, Rob. Before I start, like I always mention, third-party patches are just as important as any operating system update to resolve potential vulnerabilities. It's actually been a fairly light month compared to pretty much every other month in the past year. There haven't been that many vulnerabilities resolved this past month, but that doesn't mean that we should let our guard down. First, Adobe released updates for various products for Windows and Mac OS since last month's webinar. Multiple critical vulnerabilities were resolved across various products, including After Effects, Animate, Acrobat and Reader, Photoshop, Creative Cloud, and RoboHelp Server. These vulnerabilities include heap and stack-based buffer overflow, out-of-bounds read and write, use after free, uncontrolled search path element, and path traversal flaws, all of which could lead to arbitrary code execution in the context of the current user if exploited. Acrobat, Reader, and Experience Manager all received priority 2 ratings. To quote Adobe, in some cases, malicious exploits can be triggered remotely to hijack unpatched machines, Adobe warned. So if any of these products, if using any of these products, be sure to update as soon as possible. They recommended to ensure automatic updates is enabled, or manually just go to the Help tab and manually run the check for updates option, whenever possible, of course. Adobe also resolved moderate to important vulnerabilities in Connect, Experience Manager, Premiere Elements, as well as the other products previously listed. They had a number of other lower severity updates too. They stated that the lesser vulnerabilities could lead to privilege escalation in the context of the current user, or arbitrary JavaScript execution or privilege escalation in the victim's browser. Mozilla Firefox version 89 was also released at the beginning of June, and Thunderbird received multiple updates since last month. Firefox version 89 included a number of high to moderate severity security fixes for the password manager for Android, file names incorrectly retained in private browsing, UI spoofing, and out-of-bounds read when a locally installed hostile program sends copy data messages. Other than some resolved vulnerabilities, the biggest thing to notice in the latest update is the UI redesign, and I noticed this immediately myself. This includes simplified browser, Chrome, and toolbar to eliminate less frequently used items, reorganized and prioritized menu content according to usage with updated labels and removed iconography. Info bars, panels, and modals have a cleaner design and clear language. And to me, the most noticeable is the floating tabs neatly contain information and surface cues when you need them. Mozilla also claims there are fewer interruptions with reduced number of alerts and messages, a refined color palette, and more consistent styling throughout. Privacy has also been enhanced with total cookie protection, which confines cookies to the site where they were created, preventing companies from using cookies to track browsing across sites. It's a really cool one. This was originally launched in Firefox's ETP strict mode. Also for macOS users, the elastic overscroll effect has been added to Firefox, the gentle bouncing animation indicating that you've reached the end of the page. And context menus on macOS are now also native and support dark mode. Mozilla Thunderbird also resolved low and moderate severity vulnerabilities in versions 78.10.2 and the latest 78.11 with the same copy data vulnerability in Firefox resolved. Google Chrome has only released one update since last month. That's a little rare, again, compared to the last year. And this is for version 91 for Windows, Mac OS, and for Linux. This release has resolved a total of 33 public security fixes ranging from high to low severity and includes heap-based buffer overflow, use after free and out of bounds write flaws. Like always, Google notes that access to bug details and links may be kept restricted until a majority of users are updated with a fix. Even though last month included multiple versions of Chrome and 72 publicly released security fixes, I would still recommend to update the browser as soon as possible, given it's the only release of the last month. And of course, the latest Chrome release also affects other Chromium-based browsers such as Microsoft Edge, which did follow suit last month by releasing a number of updates for the same vulnerabilities. The May release also includes 2 Edge-specific high-severity vulnerabilities. These do not apply to Chrome, with one being rated with a CVSS score of 8.2 and related to elevation of privilege. The early June release included another Edge-specific high-severity elevation of privilege vulnerability, also with a CVSS score of 8.2. The Edge browser typically self-updates like Google Chrome, but be sure to update accordingly. Last but not least, Foxit Reader. Just want to point out some differences with this one. No vulnerabilities were publicly released. It did receive a new update and has been renamed from Foxit Reader to Foxit PDF Reader. It includes multiple UI enhancements to improve efficiency and productivity, support for more 3D functions, digital signature enhancements, as well as fixing some stability issues. The latest version doesn't resolve security fixes again, but if you're using it and you have any application management or inventory reporting tools, be aware that the software will now show with a new title. Some additional products that have seen updates since last Patch Tuesday include Citrix, Dropbox, FileZilla, Malwarebytes, Notepad++, which has reached version 8 and now includes dark mode, Opera, RingCentral, Skype, Snagit, Wireshark, and Zoom. And Zoom now supports additional group policy options, such as enabling silent auto updates. My monthly reminder to all administrators: always include third-party patching in the patch management process. It's not just about the operating system updates. Any application can be considered a risk if it's not kept properly up to date.
That's brilliant, John. Thank you so much. And I echo that 100%. Please do remember third parties are very, very important. Okay, so this month's spotlight for Pete is actually a very, very important topic that I don't think we've actually touched on yet, which I think is something that we probably should have done by now. But Pete, do you want to just walk us through your spotlight this month?
Yes, certainly, Rob. Okay, so hi everybody. This month I'm going to give a quick presentation on managing the tool that you use to manage your estate. Hopefully most of the following will be obvious to you guys, but you never know, you might learn one or two things or become aware of features that you might wish to use. So first slide please, Rob. Okay, access to the tool. When granting access to the tool, think about if the person that you're giving access to actually requires a logon account. If they only require data from the tool, such as the patches that have been deployed within the last month, then it might be possible to schedule a report that automatically emails this information out. This means that they get the required information without even needing access to the actual console. Next slide, please, Rob. Okay, granular permissions. Ascertain what permissions the user actually requires and only give those permissions. Many tools have many features that, whilst being useful, could cause problems if used without care. I've listed a few of these on this slide, things like remote control, remote registry, that's pretty powerful, that sort of thing. Okay, next slide, please, Rob. Scoping the devices. Now, this is a term that we use, but I think it is a fairly general term. I know Avanti used to use the same term as well. As well as restricting the tool set that a console user can use, you can actually restrict access to the devices that they literally have access to. This is known as scoping. For example, if a member of the IT department only deals with laptops and desktops, then their console account could be scoped so that they don't even see any of the servers that are reporting into the console. On this slide, we can see a few examples of scopes that could be set up, things like servers only, Linux only, that sort of thing. Next slide, please, Rob. Okay, so console accounts. This slide shows some suggestions that might be available to you in your console that you can set up, such as complex passwords, multi-factor authentication, that type of thing. Okay, next slide, please, Rob. Okay, so hardening access to the console. What do I actually mean by that? Well, if the console that you're using is cloud-based, then you may wish to consider creating a deny list of countries that are not allowed to access the console. So, excuse me. What this actually means is that if someone is trying to, if someone is using a device to log onto the console from a country that's on the deny list, they simply will not get access to the console. As an alternative, you could go for an allow list. This could either be IP addresses or even countries. Now, if you go down this route, just be careful, and we have had seen examples of this. You need to be careful. If you must understand this option, and just as part of a test, you put one obscure IP address in or one obscure country, you could lock yourself out of your own console, which is rather embarrassing and you know, would require some assistance to sort that type of thing out. Okay, next slide, please, Rob. Okay, so naming conventions and console organization. I think you should do this regardless, certainly console organization. Hackers and people that wish to do harm are realizing that if they can get access to your management tool, they can do real harm to your business. There is actually evidence of this sort of activity. It's actually been reported on the web. Therefore, if you keep your console neat and tidy in terms of the tasks that it's carrying out, develop your own naming conventions for these tasks that are set up, and any other patch containers, device containers, that sort of thing, then it at least will make it a little bit easier for you to spot if there's something erroneous within the console. You think, hey, that's not part of my naming convention, what's going on there? In addition to that, if your tool has audit logging, then you may wish to, or you should be looking at the audit logs regularly to spot anything that's malicious. So with that, I hope that you found at least one or two of those points interesting in my presentation, but with that, I'll hand you back to Rob. So over to you, Rob.
That's brilliant, Pete, thank you. Now, if you're actually, if you've been with us a while, you'll know that I'm an advocate of Hyper-V devices to provide sandboxes to your corporate environment. So you have your laptop that you use the Hyper-V on, and that Hyper-V then has the VPN or it has IP whitelisting back to your corporate office. If your tool does not have any of those features that Pete's mentioned, think about ways in which you could either use Azure devices or Hyper-V guests to restrict access back to your corporate network. So although the tool may not offer it directly, there is an option. And actually, I'm going to talk about some Hyper-V vulnerabilities that you should be prioritizing this month. Anyway, so thank you, Pete. That's brilliant. So let's look at the Patch Tuesdays for June. Last week, we had 2 non-security office updates. And if you're not fully aware, there is actually more than one Patch Tuesday each month. The first Tuesday of the month is reserved for non-security updates. Those non-security updates were for Office 2013 and Office 2016. Yesterday, we had 50 security fixes. So these were fixes where a security vulnerability was addressed. There's actually a lot less than we were getting just very recently. Last month we had 55, which was a great drop from what we were seeing earlier on in the year. Towards the end of last year, we were getting significantly more, maybe even double. In the third Patch Tuesday, so this would have actually been the last Tuesday of last month, we get what we call the previews. Now the previews are unsupported by Microsoft, but it's a preview of what the fixes will be in the next month. And there was one .NET Framework update released in that third Patch Tuesday. But Microsoft does very clearly state that if you have technical issues with that preview update, the only solution is to uninstall or restore your system. So for Syxsense customers, we do understand that preview updates can be auto-installed if you have Windows Update set in its custom configuration. We are providing preview content in the Syxsense console so that you can uninstall it safely if you have installed it and it has caused you an issue. Now, of the 50 security fixes, we've got 5 zero-day vulnerabilities to address. Some of them are very serious, and 1 advisory. So the advisory, as usual, is the servicing stack. And as we've learned a couple of months ago, servicing stacks can be quite dangerous. Now, they cannot be uninstalled, and they are almost always provided each month with updates. If you're on Windows 10 2004 feature update, from that point onwards, servicing stacks will actually become part of your cumulative content. So as you get a patch from Microsoft, it will automatically include the servicing stack as long as you're on 2004 feature update onwards. Any operating system before that, you do need to make sure that you install the servicing stack before the patch. It's very important. Now, these are critical in nature, so they are critical severity, but they don't actually address a security vulnerability. They just enable the patch and the hardware to work optimally together. So it's very important that you do not skip servicing stacks. So let's show you how we're going to prioritize Patch Tuesday. We actually use 6 factors to rank a vulnerability, and we start off with the vendor severity. Now, the vendor severity is not just Microsoft, but you'll also find those third parties like Google will all have their own severity, and that ranges from critical, high, medium, low, all the way down to NA. And we also have an independent score. This is assigned by NIST or FIRST, and there are other organizations permitted to score a vulnerability, and it kind of uses a more real world, how urgent is the patch, how much damage can be caused, is there a potential for data to be stolen or impact to system stability. That gets fed into a score out of 10, 10 being the very highest, 0 being the very lowest. So if you combine those two together, you have a more of an independent severity of the vulnerability. Then we've got some statuses. So we call this weaponized status. And this means that active exploits exist and have been recorded by both the vendor and the industry for a particular vulnerability. Weaponized means that your environment is never been more in danger for being hacked if you don't take an urgent deployment of the patch. Public aware, on the other hand, doesn't necessarily mean it's weaponized, but it means the precise blueprint to expose that vulnerability, it has been published to the internet. And typically this comes via bug bounty programs, and other white hat hackers would publish the blueprint to expose a particular vulnerability. Now, if you get the two, which there are actually two vulnerabilities, unfortunately, this Patch Tuesday, where it's publicly aware and weaponized, those are the more uber critical ones that you should prioritize, even if the vendor severity and the CVSS score aren't as critical as others. Those two combined should play a heavy role in your decision to prioritize those patches for deployment. Now, as we hopefully are coming to the end of COVID, but during COVID, you may not have been able to deploy all patches because of their sheer size and your distributed workforce. So we have a countermeasure, which is, there's two types of countermeasures. They are offsetting the need for the deployment of that patch. It's very important that as IT professionals, you understand that the deployment of the patch will resolve the vulnerability, but maybe there is a mitigation that means you don't need to. Maybe you have a next generation antivirus or a firewall that's protecting you from the threat. If that is the case, it means that you have something other than a deployment of a patch that you can immediately enable, or you have a workaround. So maybe you can apply an Active Directory group policy that resolves the issue, or a registry key that resolves the issue. That can be sometimes a lot easier to do than rolling out a 1 GB payload. So the last thing we do in Syxsense is we calculate your exposure. So you take the 5, you add your exposure to that, and you get a score. If you are not a Syxsense customer, that is absolutely fine. We're going to give you the list of patches anyway, ranked. All you need to do is pop the CVE numbers into your tool set and deploy the ones that have the highest exposure in your environment. Okay, now, as usual, we don't ask you to watch the webinar for our recommended list. We actually publish that directly to our Syxsense website. So if you pop over to syxsense.com, we do actually have a news page right from the top. The news page does have a Patch Tuesday holding page, so you can go directly to our Patch Tuesday articles. But if you want to see all of the other articles that we release as we go through our security roadmap for the month, we're always publishing other very interesting material as well, such as the Linux and other things as well. If you have any questions and if you're stuck, you need a patching strategy. So if you've been on some of our webinars before, you know that we've provided a lot of strategy material. You can actually download that from the download now at the top. If you need any extra questions, or if you want to start a trial, you can do so from the button, or you can talk to the techies down here. So if we go and take a look at the actual Patch Tuesday article itself, I did mention that this gets uploaded and published every single Patch Tuesday. But if you want, you can receive an email copy. So if you go to any of the pages, you see just down here, there is a subscription. You can pop in your name and your work email, and you can subscribe to receive an email every single time we publish one of these articles. Now, as I mentioned, there are 50 fixes in this Patch Tuesday. 6 of them were weaponized. We're going to go into that in a second. But this does actually have quite a large footprint of the Microsoft estate being covered in this release. So we cover pretty much everything from .NET, Windows, Hyper-V, we're going to talk about that in a second, SharePoint, and Microsoft Edge. There is actually Also, quite a serious one if you're using the Windows Defender antivirus product. There is actually a weaponized threat at the moment. So, but if you don't have Windows Defender enabled, Microsoft is recommending that you can't be exploited. Nonetheless, if you have a vulnerability scanning solution, your machines will be vulnerable for those Defender updates. So we always recommend, even if you're not using Windows Defender and there is an update, please make sure that you deploy those updates anyway, even if not using it. Now, if you're using Windows 7 and 2008 R2, there is year 2 extended content, and there are some critical ones here that you need to be aware of. 2 critical and 12 important, including a weaponized threat, which I'm going to cover off in a second. As I mentioned, the Hyper-V. The Hyper-V vulnerability that I mentioned is actually addressed by 3 updates, 31948, 31950, and 31964, because these can be used as jump points. So within the CVSS scoring system, there is a particular scope that tells you that the technology that was weaponized can be used to move sideways within the operating system or within another technology. And most of the time when you expose a vulnerability, you stay within that technology. So if Google gets hacked, the Google browser is the only place that you can stay within that infected system. But the scope, or what we call the jump point for the Hyper-V updates, actually mean that they can come out of the Hyper-V and into another technology. And I'll cover more about that in just a second. It's a very serious vulnerability that I want to address. My first vulnerability for this month is 33739. This is a DWM core library elevation of privilege vulnerability. This is only rated important by the vendor, but it is a CVSS score of 4.8. It is one of the 2 both weaponized and public aware threats in this release. So it's very, very serious. You can see why we balance both the vendor severity and other factors when choosing how to prioritize our patches, because potentially with this just being important, it may not actually have made it in your primary deployment. The second is the 33742. This is the EdgeHTML vulnerability that is both on Windows 10 and onwards, but also affecting Windows 7 and 2008 R2. This vulnerability is a boundary error when processing HTML content. So this is also very serious. All it takes is you to trick someone to opening a page, and it will trigger the memory corruption. This is rated critical by Microsoft with a CVSS score of 7.5. Not too bad, not as high as I would have expected it to be, but it is both weaponized and public aware. So again, putting those factors together jumps that to the top. This one actually can be exposed over any network. It does have high complexity, but nonetheless, it can be done with no privileges by the end user. So if someone could be tricked, your machine can be taken over. And lastly, as I mentioned, the Hyper-V, this Hyper-V vulnerability is pretty serious. A guest VM could cause a reference count in the host virtualization stack to be leaked. It isn't weaponized yet, it's not public aware yet, but its CVSS is 8.6, very, very high and one of the highest in the list. As I mentioned, there is all vulnerabilities listed, and we put some recommendations next to these, along with all of the vendor, CVSS, weaponized, public aware, and countermeasure information that we are aware of by the vendor. And I'd like to invite John and Pete. I think you've got some selections for us. Do you want to just, John, maybe you want to give me yours first? And I'll
thanks, Rob.
Bring that up.
The update it shows is CVE 2021-31956, or that's a vulnerability rather. This is for Windows NTFS elevation of privilege vulnerability. The vulnerability exists within the NTFS subsystem in Microsoft Windows 7, 8.1, 10, 2008 server, 2012, 2016, and 2019. A local user can run a specially crafted program to execute arbitrary code with elevated privileges. To exploit the vulnerability, an attacker would first have to log on to the system. An attacker could then run a specially crafted application that could exploit the vulnerability and take control of an affected system. This vulnerability was found by Kaspersky, so we suspect this vulnerability could be used to spread ransomware or other malware. It has a vendor severity of important from Microsoft, CVSS score of 7.8. It is weaponized. Public was not aware of the vulnerability beforehand, no countermeasures or mitigations. Has a local attack vector, low attack complexity, low privileges, no user interaction, and no jump point.
That's brilliant. It's a very serious one. That's actually second in our list of priorities. That's a great choice, John. Thank you. Pete, what have you got for us today?
Yeah, I've got one. Let's see, I'm going to jump the gun here. CVSS score of 9.4. So, John, you're going to have to do better, I'm afraid. It's 31962 is the vulnerability that I spotted. Okay, so it's I'm just so pleased. It's a Kerberos app container security feature bypass vulnerability. The vulnerability basically exists due to a security feature bypass issue within the Kerberos app container. A remote attacker can bypass the Kerberos authentication. The vulnerability was actually found by Google Project Zero, who specialize in finding zero-day vulnerabilities. Obviously, zero-day, very important. The SIX score was calculated by using the fact that the vendor severity is important, but the CVSS score is 9.4, which is classed as critical. It's not been weaponized and is not currently public aware, but currently there are no countermeasures either. An attack can be carried out via a network connection. The complexity of the attack is low and no privileges and no user interaction is required. So yeah, that's one to look out for.
Oh, super duper. That's brilliant, guys. Thank you so much. I actually just noticed there's a public aware vulnerability right here that exists for Windows remote desktop services. If anyone is still using remote desktop services, there is a public aware vulnerability. It's not weaponized yet. I just noticed it in the list here. I would definitely recommend that be deployed to your environment. The time in between devices on the internet and probes for vulnerabilities, I think, is 12 hours. So if you put a machine that's not fully protected onto the internet, you'll find within 12 hours it's being probed, and Windows RD, remote desktop services is one of the very first that hackers are using to access your system. So if you still have that enabled, please make sure that's prioritized as well. That's 31968. That's brilliant. Let's talk about some issues, different issues this month. Of course, the old feature update has been retired now, so there's a few new issues. If you're using Windows 7 SP1 and 2008 R2 connections to SQL Server 2005 may fail. That actually probably is because that's out. There's it's not supported, so that's quite an old version of SQL Server, but probably is supported on that old operating system. And also certain operations may fail on clustered shared volumes. That's been there for ages and ages. Microsoft is recommending, if you are using clustered shared volumes on a 2008 R2 server, please perform extra testing and please make sure you make a backup before you do any patching. For Windows 10, from 20.004 onwards, there's actually an issue that a workaround is provided for Microsoft Legacy Edge. So if you are aware, Edge actually was a feature in Windows 10, and it became an application. So the feature was effectively disabled and it became an application that you could install. I think it's what Microsoft did is by giving you a default browser. Obviously, that meant that you didn't have a choice necessarily. But what Microsoft is saying is that if you're using a custom install or an offline media install or an ISO image deployment, potentially the legacy browser will be uninstalled, but it will not install the newest Microsoft Edge if you have that particular scenario. So if you have a tool set that can help you with that with the software deployment, then that is probably one of the workarounds, or it's probably some registry keys on the TechNet article. So we have some Windows 10 Home and Pro. I've added the 21H1 now to the list. John, do you want to just walk us through this real quick?
Yeah, before going into any of the information about the new feature update, do want to point out, especially from last month, a few things about, let's see, consumer versions. Pro, Windows 10 Pro, 1909 is unsupported now as of last month. So this is the first Patch Tuesday. You're not going to receive updates. Make sure you upgrade as soon as possible. And for some slightly older versions, 1803 and 1809, they were extended for over 6 months from COVID-19, but they are also unsupported as of last month. So just like the previous version, this is the first Patch Tuesday. You won't receive updates, so upgrade as soon as possible. The newest version of Windows 10, version 21H1, finally dropped in late May. The latest version actually won't look much different compared to what we've typically seen with every new version. This is interesting because what we have usually seen in previous years is that the spring release of Windows 10 includes all of the new features and enhancements, whereas the fall release is usually pretty minor. And it looks like it's going to be the opposite this year. Next slide, please, Rob. Do you want to point out for both versions, as you saw on the previous slide, there is a date listed in yellow with regard to Windows 10 2004. Doesn't matter whether you're on a business edition or a consumer edition, pro or enterprise, it's going to have the same end of life date. So at the end of this year, you'll need to upgrade. So you've only got a few months left. Also want to point out though, regarding the new version of Windows, it is more of a service pack that resolves bugs and includes performance enhancements for existing features. All the features in 21H1 are instead targeted to business users and the remote workforce, including Windows Hello multi-camera improvements, Windows Defender application guard performance improvements, including optimizing document opening scenario times, and WMI group policy service updating performance improvement to support remote work scenarios. Microsoft is now using updates as well from the Microsoft Store or the new update, or the new Windows feature experience packs to update Windows 10 apps outside of the normal update schedule, and this will allow Microsoft to introduce new features rapidly. Next slide, please, Rob.
Yeah. Before everyone starts commenting, I do realize the end date is impossible, so I will definitely have that fixed for the next Patch Tuesday webinar.
No change with regard to the long-term versions, but as mentioned last time, we do have mainstream support ending fairly soon for the 2016 long-term service branch or service channel version. Regarding the future, so actually another thing, sorry, about Windows 21H1, just like 2004, as mentioned on the previous slide, it will also have a standardized end-of-life date, as it is typical for the spring release. So no matter whether you're on Pro or you're on Enterprise, the same end-of-life date is going to be December 13th, 2022. So going with Enterprise isn't going to get you any extra time. If you are, however, interested in exciting features released in Windows 10, you're going to have to be patient until the 21H2 release. Instead, this fall, codenamed, I don't know if it's code name, it's just a public name, Sun Valley. The next version will include a UI refresh. So it should be pretty drastic from some images I've seen and a lot of rumors, as well as a new dashboard and clipboard improvements for better productivity. So that's going to be quite exciting when we get into the fall. Again, the 21H1 is going to have a standard date, so if you do want to get some more time out of that and you do have enterprise versions, it might be worth waiting an extra few months and then start thinking about standardizing 21H2. Of course, I would recommend let about a month go by after it's released. Let all the early adopters, innovators figure out what the issues may be, if there are any, and then you'll be comfortable in pushing that out to the rest of your fleet.
Perfect.
Number of updates for not just macOS actually, but multiple Apple products. There was a 0-day update. Let's see. Before we even get to macOS, I did also want to point out on May 17th, Bootcamp 6.1.14 was also released, resolving a memory corruption issue where a malicious application may be able to elevate privileges. And this vulnerability is tracked as CVE 2021-30675. So if you happen to be using Bootcamp, make sure you do get that update. On May 24th, end of the month, Apple released a huge slew of updates, pretty much across every OS. watchOS, tvOS, iOS, iPadOS 14.6, macOS Big Sur 11.4, and Safari, as well as security updates for Mojave and Catalina. The macOS updates included various fixes for processors, the App Store, audio errors, core services, graphics drivers, Heimdall, ImageIO, kernel vulnerabilities, as well as multiple vulnerabilities in OpenLDAP, SMBX, WebKit, WebRTC, and the dock. This batch of updates also resolves the 0-day from mentioned earlier, tracked as CVE 2021-30713. This vulnerability, if exploited, could take screenshots of someone's computer and even capture images of their activity within applications or even on video conferences without that victim knowing. As listed on the screen as well, another vulnerability, improper restriction of operations within the bounds of a memory buffer. This vulnerability exists due to a boundary error in WebKit, one of the ones I mentioned from earlier, but it does have a CVSS score of 8.4, and it is being weaponized. So do be sure to update your Apple OSs as well. I could go on forever listing the number of fixes for the Apple products from the last month. So I'll simply recommend, again, update as soon as possible given the sheer volume of vulnerabilities resolved. They really do need to be prioritized if any of the OS types listed apply to you.
That's brilliant, John. And finally, we've got just some Linux of the week. Again, we put this straight onto the Syxsense website, and we've got 5 vulnerabilities. Do you want to just walk us through these?
Yeah, absolutely. I could go on as well. Week by week, we do introduce more we publish information on, certainly not introducing them, information on the vulnerabilities for the Linux devices. From the last week, just a few to highlight. Linux kernel E BPF implementation vulnerability affecting Red Hat 7 and 8. As mentioned in previous webinars, and it's pretty typical when we're looking at different vendors, every vendor or distribution in this case is probably going to provide a slightly different rating. At least the word might be different. But what to really use here to standardize is going to be the CVSS score. This vulnerability has a severity from Red Hat of important, and the CVSS score is 7.8. The next vulnerability, XML, round trip vulnerability in REXML affecting Red Hat 8. Also a rating from Red Hat, of course, important. CVSS score slightly lower, 7.5, but should still be prioritized. Next vulnerability, the SQUID URN processing vulnerability affecting also Red Hat 8. Also given a vendor severity of important, but a slightly lower score, in this case 7.4, so it's squeaked in just beneath the other. This is, however, an input validation flaw in SQUID before certain versions due to a buffer management bug. A malicious server in collaboration with a trusted client can consume arbitrarily large amounts of memory on the server running SQUID, which can result in denial of service. The Nitro Enclaves kernel driver vulnerability has a vendor severity of medium and a CVSS score of 6.7. This is still a high severity, even though it's in the 6s, that is still high, and of course should be of concern. The next, or I should say the last vulnerability on my list is the Avahi vulnerability affecting also Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8. This has a vendor severity from Red Hat of moderate and a CVSS score of 6.2. And this flaw in certain versions, a local user can trigger an infinite loop exploiting the incorrect handling of the event used to signal the termination of the client connection in a certain Unix socket on the client work function. The highest threat from this vulnerability is to the availability of the Avahi service, which becomes unresponsive after the flaw is triggered. Even though I'm only mentioning a few, which would just be a few vulnerabilities made public of the last week, you can see the rest on the website week by week. There are, of course, many others as well, and I do always recommend to prioritize, just like any update.
That's perfect, John. Thank you very much. It looks like Red Hat's actually provided quite a lot of fixes. We normally have quite a spread, but this is definitely one-sided. So excellent. Thank you very much, guys. That's brilliant. I think we have a few minutes left for any questions. Heidi, do we have any questions sent through?
We do, yes. One person asked, what is a buffer overflow?
I actually have definition for that. Buffer overflow, probably heard from some of the vulnerabilities as mentioned earlier. There were quite a few in regards to all of the different third-party updates, Adobe, as well as I believe there was buffer overflow in Google Chrome. To put it simply, it's an anomaly where an application overruns the boundaries and ends up overriding additional memory. They're typically triggered by poorly formed inputs where the allocated space is not enough to suffice for the amount of data, which could simply just in turn lead to problematic behavior. This could include, I mentioned a few additional terms as well, stack-based overflow, heap-based buffer overflow. A number of vulnerabilities I brought up earlier, again, include the buffer overflow, and it is actually fairly common.
Okay, thank you, John. The next question is, can somebody lay out the pros and cons when going for a cloud-based management console?
I guess that's aimed at me as I was talking about consoles. Okay, so I guess well, we'll cover the cons first. So, and I'm presuming that means concerns. Personally, I think, well, you want to make sure that it's hosted in a trustworthy location with assurances that the location is actually secure and being patched. Again, obviously the communication, I suppose, between the devices and the console, really you'd want that be via a secure tunnel, preferably with data encryption as well. I think also you'd want secure logon, really with at least two-factor authentication for anyone that's using the actual console. With regards to the benefits, I suppose, well, there's no internal infrastructure to manage or to patch and maintain. Obviously, with it being cloud-based, your devices should be able to be managed regardless of their location. Obviously, they would need, in simple terms, they would need internet access to do that. But obviously, there are workarounds to that issue as well. And I guess the final benefit would be that you yourself could access that console regardless of your location. Obviously, you just need internet access, so you could be in a hotel or wherever, fire up your console, and you could be working. So yeah, I think that would. There's probably a lot more I could say as well, but off the top of my head, I think that covers it.
Great, Pete. Thank you. Next question is, how long should a feature update take to install and how much space does it need? Second part is, can you do feature update and Windows patching at the same time?
I'll take that one, actually. I can't sit here all webinar, not say give a few answers. So how much space do you need? If the feature update is 6 gigabytes, you need 6 gigabytes in order to download the actual patch itself or the ISO itself. Then when it extracts, in order to install it, you need another 6 gigabytes. And then when it's installed you've now got another 6 gigabytes. So for that reason, we're recommending approximately 20 to 30 gigabytes of disk space to be safe. Once obviously the deployment is complete, the temporary files that were created should be deleted, should be removed after that's completed. Was there another question to that?
What was can you do feature updates and Windows patching at the same time?
Not at the same time, no. Actually, we found, we actually did an article about this a couple of months ago. If you are patching the system and then you choose to install an old feature update, your patch status will actually go back to the time the feature update was released. This does mean that they have to absolutely be separate, but it doesn't stop you from creating a sequence or a workflow that deploys the feature update. Then when it's finished and rebooted, it then does the patching. So you can't do it at the same time, as in go to the feature update and be patched and be fully patched at the same time, but you can sequence them, and we definitely recommend reboots in between those processes.
Great question. Thank you, Rob. There's just time for one last question, but please, everybody, if you have questions, please feel free to email them in and we will get them answered for you as well. The last question is, what can we do to make our patching more reliable?
Okay, I'll answer that one as well, because I actually had, I think that person may have messaged me during the middle of last week. If you want the top tip for patch management success, it is reboots. It is your users have to become familiar with a weekly reboot, and that will be the single most benefit for your patch management success. It is when you patch and your users don't want to reboot, or they reboot at the weekend, or they don't reboot, that you actually have issues. And actually, patch management is relatively straightforward and reliable, but it is based primarily on the reboot. So if you don't reboot, or users choose not to reboot after patch management has been performed, it's less reliable.
All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for your time, and thanks to all of our attendees for their time today.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Heidi.
Bye,
and just a warm just another thank you for me, and we really look forward to seeing you on the next webinar. Happy patching.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.